I'm here, willing to go. Where am I here? Yahuah, be with me as I learn your ways. Your ways, see one thing I've learned was to trust you with my heart. One thing I've learned was to seek you. I will seek you. I will seek you with my whole heart. It says seek and you'll find. It says knock and it will open. So I'm seeking you today. Yes, I'm seeking you today. I'm seeking you. Oh, Yahuah. I'm ready to become something better than the old me. I'm ready to learn about the new me. Oh, yeah, my Father. It says here, I will search for you, search for your day and night. I want to be, I want to know if it says no. I want to be like you. The steps of the righteous are ordered by you. Let me know. I want to see I'll see you.
Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah, Hallelujah. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah, Hallelujah. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah, Hallelujah. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah. Hallelujah. 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 Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah. Baruch haba Hashem Yahuah. Hallelujah. Hear the prophets, holy men of old, with a message that must be told of the coming rise of the kingdom and the end of Gentile reign over all creation. For the earth is crying out to be free from lies and corruption. Let the truth be spoken now. Rolling slow and conquering lion, tearing all those kingdoms down. Those against the art of creation, tell the world, shout it out loud. It's the kingdom of God, flowing down from the high place, New Jerusalem, bringing blessings to all. Peace and joy to the righteous, everlasting love, everlasting love. Come on and sing. Yes, the kingdom has come. Who believe on us? The sun would shine and the lies of the world we would recognize by the teachings of the Messiah. Now we know that we must return to the law we abandoned. For your spirit we have heard. We return to the land that was promised for redemption of all the earth. That rolling stone and conquering lion, tearing all those kingdoms down. Those against the art of creation, turn up the world, shout it out loud. It's the kingdom of God, flowing down from the high place, New Jerusalem, bringing blessings to all. Peace and joy to the righteous, everlasting love in the kingdom of God. Kingdom of God, the direction, all sickness and shame is passing away. Is the dawning of a new day. The kingdom has come. It's the kingdom of God. Rolling down from the high place, New Jerusalem, bringing blessings to all. Peace and joy to the righteous, everlasting love, everlasting love. Direction, all sickness and shame is passing away. It's the dawning of a new day. The kingdom has come. Kingdom is come. Kingdom is come. Everybody get the love. Kingdom has come. Tell all the world, everybody, tell all the world.
Well, shalom to you all, family. It is great to be here once again and to see each and every one of you. I do want to apologize to the family on YouTube because I am unable to view YouTube this evening because I am limited as to devices. I want to apologize for that. I'm still trying to see if I can. I don't think it's going to allow me to view YouTube and also to, to run the program.
It's going to allow me.
Nope. That's right. Yep. It creates echo. So if I do that, I'm going to keep hearing myself. So I can't do that. So to the family on YouTube, I want to apologize. I won't be able to see you and to see your comments. But nonetheless, I want to greet all of the family here this evening. I want to say shalom to the family here on Fuse and also to the family listening on YouTube. I greet you in the name of Yahuah on this evening. And we're going to get ready to open up this evening in prayer. And also want to, we do have the book that we have been we've been reading from when we do get a chance to do so. The book, A History of the Jews. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to it this evening. We'll see. But after we open up in prayer, I do want to open up the mic to the family. If you have any comments or questions, then certainly this is the opportunity. I don't know if there's anybody here who is also on YouTube. If you're viewing from YouTube and you can share with us here on Fuse, if there are any questions or comments on YouTube that needs to be shared with the rest of the family because I'm unable to see it, then that would be greatly appreciated. So looking for some help there this evening. Okay, Tuda Aki Keith, Tuda Rabbah. All right, well, also I saw Akut Sharia, and Aki Rab come in, and I want to say shalom to you, Mashpaka. Been missing you, and also been wondering, just, concerned. Want to make sure that the Mashpaka is okay. So it is great to see you on this evening, and we give Yahuah praise for that. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, let us Tuda Akut. Let us go ahead and open up in prayer here this evening. Halal Yahuah. Father, we give you thanks and praise because truly, Halal Yah, there is none like you. We barak your great name because truly you alone are worthy of praise. You alone are worthy of honor. You alone are worthy of esteem. Halal Yahuah. So we barak you, Father. We esteem you. Halal Yah. As we come into your presence this evening, as we gather, as we assemble, we pray, Yahuah, that you would have your way in our midst. We pray, Yahuah, that you would direct the conversation, that you would direct our study, that you would direct our thought. We pray, Father, that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our hearts would be found acceptable in your sight as we humbly submit ourselves to you. Let the name of Yahuah be praised. Allahu Yahuah. And let your esteem be seen in the earth. Continue to awaken your people, I pray, and draw them to you in Yahusha's great name. I pray, Father, that your truths would go forth on this evening with power and clarity and with authority that only comes from you. I humbly submit myself to you, Abba, and ask that you would have your way. Let your will be done, Father, in Yahusha's name. Amen. Allahu Yahuah. Praise Yahuah. Great to see you all, Mashpaka. We give Yahuah, once again, we give Yahuah praise, honor, and esteem for this great opportunity to be able to assemble once again. Okay, bear with me just for a second. I think I hear my daughter at the door. Come on in. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, Shadi. All right. Okay, so I'm sorry about that, but I am back. All right. Well, I'm going to begin this evening by opening up. Oh, by the way, let me just greet everybody. And again, I can't see YouTube currently, maybe in a moment I'll be able, maybe in a little bit I'll be able to, if my wife can find this tablet. But I want to say shalom to Aki Wan Yahu. As always, Aki, shalom to you and to your mashpakat, to your bayat. It is wonderful to see you as always, Aki. I also want to say shalom to Akut Vernice. It is great to see you as always, my Akut. And to my Akut Sharia, Aki Rob. It is great to see you, family. Also to Aki Keith. You say shalom to you and to your bayat, Aki. To all who are listening, who can hear me, whose names may not be represented, I want to say shalom. Also to Akut Al Yashaba, shalom to you, Akut. Wonderful to see you as always. And Akut Amuna, I want to say shalom to my Akut Amuna. To you and to your bayat, I say shalom, Akut. To Akut Mary, I greet you, Akut, in the name of Yahuah. Wonderful as always to see you, Akut. And to my Aki Keenan, I want to say shalom to you, my Aki. And also to Akut Carmen, shalom, shalom to you, Akut. Great to see you as always, and to know that we share in this great fellowship on this evening. To the family on YouTube, shalom to you all. Sorry that I cannot see the screen there on YouTube right now. You know what? Have a thought though. Maybe, just maybe, I can cheat a little bit. Let me see if that's possible. Bear with me just for a second. Maybe that's possible. Okay, it might be possible. I muted it, so the sound won't come back at me. And in so doing, I might be able to see, and you're seeing what I'm seeing. So I'm just gonna say shalom to the mashpaka here on YouTube. Let me see if I can see that. All right, I should be able to see. Okay, so if somebody do post something to YouTube, I should be able to see it. It'll be a matter of doing a little bit of dancing back and forth with the screen, but I should be able to see. So praise Yahuah for that. I won't be able to see it right away because I have to keep going back and forth with the screens, but praise Yahuah, it worked. Just had that thought and it worked. So praise Yahuah. Okay. So we give Yahuah praise, honor, and esteem. Now, I want to open up the microphone. I don't know if there are any comments or questions from the family this evening. I don't want to come with any. I don't want to determine which way this thing goes this evening. May Yahuah do so. And you know, just want to know if you family, if there's anything that you have that you would like to share, any questions or comments that you would like to have. I see that Aki Wanyahu is breaking the ice for us, and I want to say to the Rabba Aki. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to release the mic to you, Aki. Mic is yours.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Aki.
Good evening. Praise Yahuah.
Praise Yahuah.
Praise Yahusha as well.
Hello.
Aki, I had a question yesterday and wish the answer was very clear, but then I still have another question on the same subject.
Okay.
Concerning the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
We know that we are Yasharal, and because we in bondage, that's why we in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my question is, we that know that we are in bondage and that our brothers and sisters are like few of them are homeless,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that few of them, even though they can do better, like work to earn their food, their daily food,
Mm-hmm.
but because we're in bondage, they oppress us that so much, and they put so many stuff in our, confuse us so much,
Mm-hmm.
and let us think that, and put us to think that we are less.
Mm-hmm.
Is that have something to do with I mean, is okay that I don't give somebody money knowing that this person probably don't even know that is Yasharal? I don't know if you get my point.
Yeah, I do get the point, Aki. And to respond to that question, Yahuah, as a matter of fact, it wasn't Yahuah, but
I think it was Shahul. Shahul was writing to the people of Yasharal who were in captivity, in bondage in Rome. And it was the same situations, just as we are today. They were being oppressed. They faced all kinds of obstacles. And so Shahul, knowing the situation, what he said to the assembly, to those who were awake, he said this to them. He said, do good unto all men, but especially those of the household of belief. So where we have it in our power to do for someone, then certainly we should do. Where we have it in our power to do, we shouldn't have it and then tell them, come back tomorrow. I was just reading that the other day from the scriptures. I don't remember where it's at, where Yahuah says, if you have it in your hand to give, don't tell him to come back tomorrow, but give it to him. Now, with that said, we also have to use wisdom in our giving, because people will also prey on your kindness. Yeah, they may be Yasharal. They're in a drunken state. They're in a state of sleep, but they will prey on your kindness. And so we still have a responsibility, because what you have been given, a key, has been given to you by Yahuah, and you are expected to be a good steward over that. And so even in our giving, we still have to use wisdom in our giving. And so you recognize when we use wisdom, Yahuah gives us wisdom to recognize when somebody is truly in need and there's nothing that they can do about their situation. And where it's possible, we need to do whatever we can to help. But then he also gives us the wisdom to recognize when a person just isn't trying. Yes, there are obstacles, you see, but at least put out an effort, put forward an effort. Some people just don't put out an effort, you see. So Shahul, writing to Yasharal who were in bondage in Rome, he said, do good to all men, but especially those of the household of belief. So our first responsibility is to do good to those of belief. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow. That's right. Mashali, chapter 3, verse 28. To the akut sharia. As a matter of fact, we just read that last Shabbat, right? Yeah, so we read it here in the room last Shabbat also. To the rabba akut. Yes, so that's our responsibility. But even in giving, we have to use wisdom. So I hope that kind of clarifies things, Aki. And by the way,
Tuda, you always comes with the right answers and with a lot of knowledge. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Praise Yahuah, and I want to say Tuda Rabbah to you for a very important question, Aki. All right. Well, again, to Yahuah be all esteem. Anyone else, family? Any other comments or questions this evening? I'm gonna switch my screen here for a moment. Oh, I see Aki Keith. Please go ahead, Aki Keith. Mic is yours, Aki.
Shalom, Aki.
Shalom to you, Aki. Great to hear you again this evening.
Okay, I just want to make a statement.
Yes.
Look, a comment. Okay, so last night, after the Shabbat, I had a Christian guy. He texted me. He wanted me to come by his house. So I went by his house. Him and another Christian guy. So we was talking about. So they already know how I believe. Mm-hmm. So they already know I want to turn back to Christianity.
Yes.
And so as we was talking, and so James asked me. He said, "So you believe that we were slaves? What kind of proof is there?" Mm-hmm. And and so I didn't say nothing. Now this other Christian guy said he's from Africa. He's from Sudan. Uh-huh. And he looked at James and he said, you're talking really stupid right now. He said, now I came from Africa and I feel like I'm a slave. And I know that you guys are slaves. So what's your point? And he just babble on and babble on. So make a long story short. So Will asked me, Will said, Keith, can you do me a favor? I said, what's that? He said, could you pray to Yahuah and ask him to bless me? I said, now let me get this straight. So you want me to pray to him to bless you, but you're not going to serve him, correct? He said, yeah. I said, okay, let's see how that goes. So that's how that went. All right, that's all I wanted to say. Ta-da.
Yes, praise Yahuah. Ta-da for sharing, Aki. That's a funny one there indeed. And maybe he was being a little facetious, a little funny perhaps. And maybe he was serious too, because we find in the scriptures where you have unbelievers, you have the heathen, you have the wicked who didn't believe in Yahuah, but when it came a certain point in their life where they had a situation, they would say to the people of Yahuah, they would say to the servants of Yahuah, to the prophets, to the messengers, hey, call on your Elohim for me, call on your Yahuah for me, but Yahuah also cautioned us about petitioning him for the wicked. He also cautioned us about that, because in many cases, and it's there are times when petition can be made, but then there are times too when again wisdom comes in, because the wicked, when Yahuah works on behalf of the wicked, what does the wicked do? The wicked will take his esteem and give it to their idol. And that's why we see, for example, when Yahusha spoke in the book of Yahuah, chapter 17, he said, I do not pray for the world. I do not pray for everybody, but for those who are the elect. You see, those are who I pray for. And so, but that was quite funny, Ki. Tuda for sharing. All right, let me turn my attention to YouTube here for a moment. I want to say shalom to Akulela Mantegi. I hope I said that correctly. I want to say shalom and welcome also to Aki Danihal Ushayahu Yasharal. I want to say shalom to you, Aki. And also to Akut Carmen. I believe Akut Carmen is also with us on Fuse. So shalom to you all, family. It is great to see you on this evening. Again, this is Foundational Facts Fellowship, where the mic is always open, and the fellowship exists, to entertain the questions and comments that we might not be able to get to on Shabbat, because we have particular subject matters that we're covering. And so I want you to know that please feel free to come to the mic. If you would like to, if you have a question or a comment that you would like to share, please, by all means, feel free to come to the mic. If there are no comments or questions at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my attention to this book that we have been reading from. And as time goes on, family, I promise that, somebody ripped a page out of the book. Might be shoddy. But as time goes on, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be digging deeper into the history of our people. We're going to be digging.
Because she gets so caught up in things that are beyond.
There's a flag up.
To handle.
Let me say shalom to Aki Trevin. Great to see you this evening, Aki. Okay, flag is up. Please go ahead. I'm not sure which flag is up, but please go ahead. Aki Trevin, good evening to you, Aki. Shalom. Great to see you. I think there's a flag. I think there's a flag up. I don't see it on my end, but if there's a flag, please go ahead. Whoever flag is raised, please go ahead, Mashbaka. Oh, the camera is up. Okay, that's Aki Trevin. That's Aki Trevin. Shalom to you, Aki. Great to see you. All right. Yes, yeah, he has a headset on. Okay. All right. So, okay, his flag was up. I don't think that was intentional. I think he accidentally his flag was up. Okay. So what we're gonna do is, as time goes on, we're gonna be digging into the history of our people. Aki Keith shared just now that report about that conversation that he had yesterday evening. And some people, a lot of our people just don't know their history. I have a cousin who told me, he said to me one time, he said, we had a brief conversation, and he said to me, you don't teach your children their history, he said to me. And he's aware of what I do. He's aware of what I stand for. He's aware of what I post on social media. And so in his mind, I guess it might be foolishness in his mind is what I'm guessing. And he don't see that as teaching our history. You know, he's clueless. He said, you don't teach your children their history, he said to me. And as far as he's concerned, teaching our children their history, he said, what he said was history. No, what he said was heritage. He said, you don't teach your children their heritage, is what he said to me. And in his mind, as far as teaching anybody our heritage, it only goes back to, if you're Jamaican, it goes back to the short history of black people in Jamaica, so-called black people in Jamaica. If you're American, it goes back to the civil rights era, and so on. For many of our people, that's as far as history goes or heritage goes for them, and they are confident that they know their history, you see. And so what we're going to do is, as time goes on, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to read this book called A History of the Jews, because we need to understand how it is that our history was stolen. We need to understand how it is that our history was stolen, you see. You know, yesterday I created a banner for Facebook, and I think I'm going to try to pull that up very quickly here, if I may. But I created a banner for Facebook. Give me just a second, family. I'm going to pull it up. And bear with me just for a second. I'm going to stop screen sharing on YouTube just for a second. Okay. But I'm going to pull up this banner. I'm going to pull up my Facebook here so you can see the banner that I created. We're going to talk about it for a little bit. Okay, as we discuss our history, the fact that our people don't know their history, and that's a part of the problem. You see, if you don't know where you're coming from, you certainly won't know where you're going. And that's a big part of the problem. So I'm going to pull up this banner that I created yesterday. I'm going to share my screen again on YouTube. Bear with me just for a second. My wife has this book that she's reading. She's reading several of them. I don't remember which one this exactly it was that she was reading, but she was reading, and I was listening to her. She was sharing with me what she was reading, and it just prompted me to create the banner, because it is a fact that's highlighted in the book. It is a fact that is highlighted in the book, but a lot of people don't, they fight against this truth. They have a difficult time embracing this fact. That goes for our people and for other people, you see. But what this banner says, you can't see it very clearly. You can't see it very clearly. Now, what I did was to create this banner. I went and I looked up an old map of Africa. Okay, I went and I looked up an old map of Africa. And what this map shows you is that what's today called the Middle East. You've heard me say this probably many times. You've probably heard me say this many times, that it wasn't until about 1932 or somewhere around there that we ended up with a place called the Middle East. Okay, it wasn't until around 1932, 1933 when America and Britain created what's now called the Middle East. Okay, and And the reason why they created what's now called the Middle East, it's a part of the stolen identity program. Okay, it's a part of the scheme that they have used to steal the identity of a people, to steal our identity, and to attempt to steal what rightfully belonged to us. And so what they did was, because prior to that time, Africa, what they call Africa, which was not Africa before, what Yahuah called it, he called it the land of Ham. And sometimes the entire continent is even referred to as, and it's not even Ethiopia, but in translation, Ethiopia. Okay. But prior to them doing this, what's today called the Middle East, which would include Saudi Arabia, which is where Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai is. No problem, Aki. Which is where the real Mount Sinai is, Saudi Arabia. But prior to them creating this name for that portion of land that they call the Middle East, prior to that, it was all known as Africa. And the continent of Africa have always been much larger than the continent of Europe. But because of white supremacy, what they did was, on their maps, number one, they broke up the land. They attempt to break up the land. And number two, they would draw the land smaller, draw it to appear smaller than it actually is. You see, and to make Europe look bigger than it actually is. All of that is white supremacy. It's just a part of what they did when it comes to white supremacy and the doctrine that the so-called white man was created to rule the world. And so white supremacy affected every area of life and still does, you see. But if you look at this map, before they made that change, even by their own drawing of the map, what's today called the Middle East was also a part of Africa. You see this here? This is what's called the Middle East today. This land right here is what's called the Middle East. And if you look here, it is labeled as Africa. All of this was known as Africa. Okay? So it wasn't until about 1933 when they made that change, all right, where they began to divide up the land. So when we say that Yasharal is a part of the continent of Africa, that has always been a fact and still is a fact, you see. In the same way, they say Egypt, anywhere north, they draw an imaginary line across here. And what they do is they say all of this down here is black land and up here is white land. When these people weren't white, they were all black people. And so Egypt is white, known and recognized as white land, okay, which in fact it's not. Now, the reason why I made this banner, though, and I'm going to read it, it says, how did a text that speaks of and to African countries in over 98% of its references, I'm going to read that again because someone might not catch what I actually say there. How did a text that speaks of and to African countries in over 98% of its references become European/English? How did a text, the scriptures, that speaks of and to African countries in over 98% of its references become European or English? How did that happen? How did the scriptures become an English text? How did the scriptures become a European text when over 98% of the time that it speaks to nations or of nations, the nations that it speaks, the nation that it speaks to and the nations that it speaks of are so-called African nations? So how then did that text somehow become a European text when over 98% of the time It's speaking to an African nation and speaking about other African nations and speaking to people of a nation who are scattered into other parts of African nations, right? So how did it become European? I wrote, note above that the Middle East used to be known as Africa before that was changed. So in the scriptures, the modern day names that you find today and the modern day names that are used today, you find names like Egypt, Ethiopia, Niger, Iran, Iraq, Palestine, Arabia, Somalia, Yemen, Kush. The scripture speaks of all these lands. The scripture speaks of all these lands. These are just some of the examples. Yasharal, not on the list, but the scripture speaks of all these lands. And where are all these lands located? They're located in Africa. So the question is, how did then a text that addressed these lands and peoples in these lands, how did it somehow become a European text? You see, so that's a part of the deception. That's a part of the lies that we have inherited. And that's the confusion that faces our people. So people, because they don't realize how corrupt the Bible is, when they read the Bible, they have a tough time because what they see in the Bible says something different than what we are saying to them. Then they have a difficult time making the connection. You see, and so that's why it's important for us to know our history and to revisit our history and to revise the history that have been given to us. And so that's why we're reading from these books, you see, because our people need to know how it is that we came to inherit the kinds of lies that we have inherited. Okay, now, so with that, I want to go back. It's been a while since we have read from this book, but I want to go back to this book. The title of the book is A History of the Jews. And so I want to go back to this book, and I want to show you, I want to read a little bit of the twisted history and discuss how what it reveals is just how they come to take our identity. And there are a lot of different what should I say, articles and writings that we're gonna be looking at as time goes on. Okay, but we want to see how it is that our identity becomes stolen, how it is that so many of our people don't know that they're slaves, and that their ancestors were slaves, and that in fact slavery still ain't even over. You see, we're still in bondage. You see, so we I'm going to pick up in this book. I'm going to skip forward in the book here a little bit. Okay, we read some part of the beginning, and we see how they twist everything. In the beginning of the book, they're actually using our history, but what they do is they just remove our names and put Jews in place of us. You see, and that's how they go about stealing our history. So as we began, they're actually talking about events, historical events that affected us, that our ancestors were a part of, but they took those very same historical events and removed the names of our people, the names of our ancestors, and put their names in its place. So now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of jump up a little bit here now and to see how it play out in modern times, right? And so this yes indeed, Aki, yes indeed, in love with him, yes indeed. Look at us as crazy, absolutely. You see, and that's because the scripture says, for a lack of knowledge my people perish. You see. Yes, it's not on Fuse. It's not on Fuse, Aki, because I don't have, it's a printed copy that I'm using. By the way, let me just check YouTube. Yeah, it's a printed copy that I'm using, and so you won't see it on Fuse. The author of this book is Solomon Grazel. Solomon Grazel. The title of the book is A History of the Jews by Solomon Grazel.
That's the book. Okay? History of the Jews by Solomon Grazer.
Aki?
Yes, Aki. Go ahead, Aki.
No, I meant that the map, that it was not showing at all. And so I
it wasn't. Oh,
of the family did not see it.
I see. Okay.
Okay, sorry.
No. Thank you, Aki, for bringing that to my attention. I'm sorry. Let me put it the map that I was making reference to. So for the family on Fuse, that's the map that I was making reference to. And this is a map drawn by the English of Africa, you see. And this portion here, this is what's today called the Middle East. But as you can tell there, all of this was known as Africa. This and all of this was Africa before America and Britain decided to widen the canal that they now call the Suez Canal, and to separate this, even though it's still connected, but to make a separation, and then call this the Middle East, and then call this Africa, and they call up here white land, North America, white land. So places like Libya and Egypt and all these places located up here are considered to be white land. When people migrate from these places, on their immigration document, they identify them as white. It doesn't matter how melanated they are. It doesn't matter how black they are. They identify them as white. Now, the other thing is, how did, for example, in Libya, how did so many light-skinned people come to be in Libya when Libya has historically been a black land? How did so many light-skinned people come to be in Turkey when Turkey was historically a black land? How did so many light-skinned people come to be in Egypt when historically Egypt was a black land? Well, that goes back to, and I always have a difficult time remembering the emperor, but that goes back to an emperor from the north, from the Caucasus Mountains. So the people in the Caucasus Mountains, what they did was they were divided. They became divided by religion. The people in the Caucasus Mountains, okay? The Caucasians became divided by religion. In the Caucasus Mountains, they had no, and family, this is not, I don't say this to be funny, but you can find Caucasians who tell the truth, telling you this fact, okay? But in the Caucasus Mountains, they had no original religion of their own. The people in the Caucasus Mountains had no original religion that belonged to them. So everything that they adopted, they took from African nations. Now, of course, they themselves are Africans. They started out in Africa. You see, they started out in Africa. They started out in sub-Saharan Africa. That's where creation began. They moved northward. They went into Nubia, into Egypt, and then from there they marched on out of Egypt, while others stayed behind and built the place up. They were exploring. And over many, many years, because the earth is much older than what we are told that it is, but over many years, hundreds of thousands of years, a people who were once black, who traveled through Africa, up into North Africa, and then ventured out into Europe, and eventually end up in America and so on, over hundreds of thousands of years, being exposed to different climates. Their bodies changed and adapt, and that's where white skin came from. Scientists years ago printed in the one of the journals, I forget which journal of medicine, well-recognized, world-class journal of medicine, that they found the gene responsible for white skin. And basically what they're saying is, and what they're admitting to is, what everybody
should know that everybody came from black. But what happened, what brought the change was when they went into colder climates, coming out of the sunshine, going into colder climates, into darker territory. Over time, over many years, hundreds of thousands of years, gradually the body changed. Hair texture changed. Eye color changed. The genome changed. Pigmentation changed to adapt to the climate that they settled in, you see. And so that's what happened. That's how white skin came about. And before the 1800s, late 1800s, going into the 1700s, nobody was known as white and nobody was known as black. Those terminologies were developed. It came out of white supremacy. It came out of white supremacy because they created the definitions for the word white and for the word black. And they wanted to be known as white because white is pure, white is good, white is everything that is that should be desired, and black is everything that is undesirable. And so all those definitions came out of hatred and white supremacy, out of the doctrine of white supremacy. But when they were in Europe, they didn't respond to each other as white. They respond to each other by their nations, you see. It wasn't until they encountered other people who didn't look like them that they then begin to, and even then, because prior to the 1800s, Europeans still encountered people, black people, because they traded freely around the world. Whites and blacks, so-called whites and blacks, what they call whites and blacks today. But even then, they didn't call them whites, and nobody called anybody black. So that wasn't until the 1800s, late 1800s into the 1700s, that they put that in place. And that's where the doctrine of evolution sprung up. And that's where they began to spread the doctrine that people who are black are not fully human. And that's where the idea come from in the U.S. Constitution, that black people are only 3/5 of a human being. And that's what led to the justification for slavery. And that's what has led to and continue to lead to the mistreatment of a people, and why so many people can continue to turn a blind eye on injustice, because there is still a great many people, even in this country to this very day, who do not see black people in the same way that they see somebody who look like them with a lighter complected skin. And so that's the problem. Anyway, so that's the map that I was making reference to. Now I'm going to go back to as a matter of fact, maybe I'll just keep that there for right now, and I'm going to turn my attention to the book. I'll just in case there's anything on the screen that I need to see, I just want to open that up. Okay, so how about the Khazaria? Great question, and that's exactly yes, Solomon. Oh, let me spell his name. I'm sorry, family, I wasn't seeing the screen. It's spelled Grayzel. Grayzel, as correctly stated there, Bernice. Solomon Grayzel. Yes. The book, The 13th Tribe. Yep. Another book written by a Jewish man who told the truth and was murdered by them. He disappeared, never to be found again. He was celebrated before he wrote that book. He was a celebrated author. His name was Arthur Koestler. He was a celebrated author. And after he wrote the book, The 13th Tribe, and you know why he's called it The 13th Tribe, right? Because here's a 13th tribe, the Jews, who are now adding themselves to the original 12 tribes. All right, so we know that there are 12 tribes in the nation of Yasharal. And so he called the Jews the 13th tribe because they've basically now created a 13th tribe. There is no 13th tribe recognized by Yahuah. Yahuah only recognized 12 tribes. So that's why the book is called the 13th tribe, because they wrote themselves in, you see. Yes, indeed. They wrote themselves in. And that's not the only book. There's another book that I would like to share with you. Okay. As a matter of fact, one of the books that my wife has was also written by the person who wrote this book. The book is called The Synagogue of Satan. Now, when you want to understand how the Jews, the Khazars, got as powerful as they are, how they come to own the banking system and to own Hollywood and to own everything. When you want to understand the history of that and how that all developed, you've got to read the book, The Synagogue of Satan. And as we go through here, I'm going to be reading from that. I'm going to be reading some excerpts from that book, The Synagogue of Satan. I can get a PDF. I can get a PDF of it online. So I'm going to be putting it on the screen where you can see it. Okay. I'm going to put it on the screen where you can see it. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It lays out the history of how it is that they come to be so powerful. Okay, so we're going to be looking at that. And I'm sorry, Akut, I don't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but I will be putting it on the screen as we go on. As a matter of fact, I will bounce back and forth between these books as we continue here. Okay, it is my hope that our people will get a hold of this information and that it will continue to help in the awakening of our people, because we have been duped, we have been bamboozled, you see. And so we're going to continue to dig. That's the only way you're going to find the truth. You got to dig for it, because they've buried it. But you know, not Malcolm X, but Martin Luther King once said, truth pressed down in the ground will rise again. And the truth is rising. Yes, indeed, the truth is rising. All right. Now, let me just peek over at YouTube. Bear with me here, family. I don't want to leave out the family on YouTube. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. To the Akut Carmen for posting the information on YouTube for the Fuse room. If you want to call in, if you're on YouTube and you want to participate in the conversation, then you can call that number 201-479-4595. That's 201-479-4595. Or if you want to log into the platform, you can go to fusemeeting.com. That's FUZE meeting.com, and then you can when you go there, you can click join a meeting, and then you put in the meeting number 288-09658. That's 288-09658. You can also download the app if you'd like, but it can be a little taxing on your computer processing power, so you might want to just join a meeting, click join a meeting, and type it in and join the meeting from your browser, where you don't have to download the app. Okay, so that's it. Now, yeah, Andrew Carrington. Yes, Andrew Carrington, that's the author. Tuda Aki. All right, so we're going to be looking at some of that also. Okay, now let's go back now to, oops, what did I do? Sorry about that. What did I do? I might have messed up. Okay, I've got to find my way back. I think I messed up. So let me find my way back to YouTube. Bear with me just for a second, family. Bear with me. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Got a lot going on here, so I'm just trying to keep up. Okay. All right. So now, all right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen here for a moment. I'm going to go back to All right. Okay. All right. So here we go. Oh, Aki Keenan, I see your flag. Please go ahead, Aki. Sorry, I don't know how long it's been raised. That I missed it until now, but I'm sorry. Please go ahead, Aki.
I forgot what it was I was going to ask.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Aki. Because I was I was sharing screen. I didn't see it. I'm sorry about that.
Shalom, Mr.
Shalom. Shalom, Aki.
I'm off the mic.
Okay, Aki. Okay. All right. So so we're in a portion of this book, A History of the Jews, where they're now turning their attention to the West. Okay? The role of the Jew. And it says the Jews come to Europe. That's funny. The Jews come to Europe. How is it that the Jews come to Europe when the Jews have always been in Europe? The Jews are from Europe. We know the history of the name Jew, right? So when our people argue with other people about you're not the Jews, we're the Jews. No, that's a mistake, you see. No, we are not Jews. The people of Yasharal, the people of the book, the people of the scriptures, Yahuah never called us Jews. So we shouldn't be arguing with anybody about being Jews. The word Jew is a German word. It's a German word. And in German, the word Jew is Yids. Jew is Yid. The plural form is Yids. Okay? Now, when you study language, what you learn is that the Y is what was later changed to a J. Okay? The Y in the Greek language is the iota. Iota. How do you write that again? Iota. I don't remember how they spell it. I-A-O-T-A or something. Iota in Greek. Okay? It's iota in Greek, but it's the iota in Greek makes the ya sound. Okay? The iota in Greek makes the ya sound. And when they brought the iota into English earlier on, it came over as an I, but they understood that it made the ya sound. But what they later did was they changed the iota, which made the ya sound. They changed it to the letter J by adding a little hook to the iota, to the I that was supposed to make, that they knew made the ya sound. And that's so the iota that made the ya sound became J, as in Jesus, Jesus, okay? Or as in Yid. So with Yid, the ya, the iota became a J, and they present it in English as Jew. Yid, Jew. Yids, Jews. And from Yid, you get the language Yiddish. Yiddish, the language of the Jews. The language of the Jews, a German language. Yiddish, a German language. A German language. Okay? So when we read this book, now, the reason why I'm going to this length is to show you the twist, to show you the corruption, to show you how they lie to us in our faces and hoping that we don't do any research. So they title this, The Jews Come to Europe. How the Jews are going to come to Europe when the Jews have always been in Europe? Isn't Germany a part of Europe? It absolutely is, you see. But they say the Jews come to Europe. That's a part of stealing the identity. That's a part of laying the framework, you see. All right. So we're going to read. I'm going to read the introduction here, family. And the introduction says, so again, this is not the beginning of the book. The book has two introductions. Okay. We're now at the middle of the book. And now they're going to talk about the Jews come to Europe. A lie, but you know, they're laying the groundwork. So this is the introduction to the second part of the book, which is where now the Jews are coming to Europe. Supposedly, the Jews were in Yasharal in the other part, and that's where they took our history and replaced the names of our people with the Jews, you see. So now they're going to make the case for the Jews in Europe. And out of this comes the doctrine of Anglo-Israelism. Anglo-Israelism. And what Anglo-Israelism teaches is that every nation in Europe is a part of the nation of Yasharal. And that England is Yahuah. Okay? England is the head of the tribes. That's why the flag, the Union Jack, that's why it's called the Union Jack, the Union of Jacob. That's what it represents, because they believe that's why you have the royal family. That's based on Exodus, Shamut chapter 19. Because in Shamut chapter 19, Yahuah says concerning his people that you are a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation. And so what they did was they take that and they established a so-called royal family, because we are the royal bloodline. We are the tribe of Jacob. Yahuah, they changed to Jacob, right? Okay, so all of that ties in, okay? So this is where they begin to build their doctrine for Anglo-Israelism. The role of the Jew. We turn now to the lands of the West, where new nations were making their entrance into the arena of history. In several instances, Jews had inhabited these lands long before the new tribes moved in. You hear this now? You hear this stuff? So what they're saying here now is that long before any other peoples moved into Western lands, as they call them, long before the Indians inhabited America and Asia and anywhere else, long before any of this happened, the Jews were already present in these places. You know what they're doing, right? They're setting up the claim that the land belonged to us. Everywhere belonged to them. That's the claim that they're setting up. Okay? So I'm going to read that again. We turn now to the lands of the West, where new nations were making their entrance into the arena of history. In several instances, Jews had inhabited these lands long before the new tribes moved in. More Jews followed during subsequent centuries. The tribes which were displacing the Roman emperor were just taking their stumbling first steps toward civilization. They had no history other than the tales of mighty deeds by their mythical heroes. They had no ambitions other than conquest. Slowly and imperfectly, they were beginning to understand the ideas which the young Christian religion had previously taken from the Jews. So, according to them now, Christianity belonged to the Jews. You see, that's why I say to you, family, that Judaism is nothing more than Christianity in another skirt. The harlot in another skirt. You see? That's all Christianity is. But the fact of the matter is, the truth is that the Jews were not the founders of Christianity. The people of Egypt were the founders of Christianity. Then Rome stole it from Egypt. And then later on, Khazar, Khazaria laid claim to it, but they didn't even find it. They weren't even the ones that stole it from Egypt. The Romans stole it from Egypt, but here they're making the claim that the Romans stole it from them. Okay. So I started earlier, I said that Khazaria, the Caucasus Mountains, were divided by religion, that they had no religion of their own. What they did was they adopted Christianity, they adopted Islam, and they adopted the ways of Yasharal. Okay. And so out of it, that's where you find divided among them. Basically that's what happened. So the people who rule Turkey right now, the people who rule Egypt right now, the light-skinned people in the Middle East are actually from the Caucasus Mountains, who came in and took over those lands. They're not original to those lands. They're from the Caucasus Mountains. But the thing was, so the people in Turkey, the people in Egypt and those places, the people in Libya, they adopted, while they were in the Caucasus Mountains, they adopted Islam. That's why to this day, you still find a lot of Muslims in the Caucasus Mountains. Okay? In what was once the USSR, you still find a lot of countries that identify themselves as Muslims. That's a big problem right now in Russia, because you have Muslims fighting against, in Russia, you have some call themselves Christians, some have no belief, you believe in nothing or whatever the case is, you see, but you have this great conflict. A lot of those countries are Islamic because they adapted that religion earlier on, just as some of them took the ways of our people and others took the ways of Christianity, you see. And the book, the 13th tribe, lay out those facts, okay? And other writings do also. All right, now, they had no history other than the tales of mighty deeds by their mythical heroes. They're talking about the Romans. They had no ambitions other than conquest and the other nations. Slowly and imperfectly, they were beginning to understand the ideas which the young Christian religion had previously taken from the Jews. By contrast, the Jews were an old people. They had already passed through a kind of national adolescence, when the physical heroism of judge and king had been balanced by the spiritual heroism of prophet and poet. So what they're doing is they're just claiming Yasharal's history right here. They're saying that the nation, the Jews had been a functioning nation, a functioning people for many centuries before the Christians. And what they're pointing to is the history of Yasharal, because Yasharal have been a functioning nation. We have had kings and judges and prophets. We have been a functioning people for a very long time, long before Khazar come into the picture. Khazar didn't come into the picture as a nation until the 700s, you see. And by the 900s, they stole our identity. That's where Yasharal went and mixed up with them, intermingled with them. That's why some of them today are darker than others. You see, the ones who mix, they're darker. They have a tint, you see. All right, now, by contrast, the Jews were an old people. They had already passed through a kind of national adolescence when the physical heroism of judge and king had been balanced by the spiritual heroism of prophet and poet. They were even then approaching the end of the student period. They were even then approaching the end of the student period begun by the scribes, developed by the Pharisees, and continued by the Tanahim, Amorahim, and these names are, they ain't correct, and Geonim. The Jews already carried with them the wisdom of maturity, which valued peace, freedom, and the chance to search for truth. They could serve as cultural links to the civilizations of the past, their own and those of the peoples among them, among whom they had lived for many centuries. Their mere presence among the new nations was a cultural stimulant. This period of Jewish history, therefore, may well be called the period of the Jew as culture bearer and teacher. In other words, the Jews taught the world civilization. The Jew played that role without in the least being conscious of it, and for it he has received far too little credit. Heroic loyalty. There is a widespread but erroneous impression of continuous and unmitigated sorrow. There were, as a matter of fact, long periods when the Jews and their neighbors lived quietly and peacefully side by side. It is true, however, that for many centuries, the relations between the Jews and the Gentiles were a blot on the name of humanity. The important thing, because they were savages, the important thing, according to Arthur Koestler, the Jewish writer, they were savages. The important thing during such periods is not that horrors were visited upon the Jews. No, that's not what happened, but that they suffered them with dignity and heroism. It is this that makes Jewish history inspiring. The history of no other group can offer such examples of willingness to carry on an unpopular ideal for century after century, despite every temptation and in defiance of every force. Numerous explanations have been offered for this remarkable fact. The true explanation is probably the simplest, namely, that knowledge of Jewish teachings, thorough acquaintance with Jewish idealism, compels such admiration for Judaism as to make its abandonment shameful. Our history in Europe is a continuous illustration of this truth. We're going deeper. Chapter 1, the Jews come to Europe. That was the introduction. The Jews settled in various parts of Western Europe and helped the occupants of these lands to advance their civilization. The end of a world and a new beginning. In order properly to relate the story of the Jews of Europe, we shall have to go back about 1,000 years so as to describe the beginnings of the Western states and their earliest contacts with the Jews. The Western Jews originally came from the East, bringing with them many of the cultural and all the religious attitudes of their Eastern brothers. Their settlements were new, their neighbors were new, and the situations which they faced were quite different from those faced by the Jews of the East. But their memories, their traditions, and their interpretation of life were the same. The first 1,000 years of Jewish life in Europe show how the new situation and the old attitudes affected one another. This period is therefore a necessary introduction to the history of the European Jews, in the same way as the history of the 13 colonies in a necessary introduction to the history of the United States. The earliest settlements, the city of Rome. The earliest connection between the Jews and Western Europe was made in the city of Rome. Not true. You know why they say that? Because they have to make the connection to the city of Rome. Because the people of Yasharal was taken out of their land into Rome as slaves by the Romans. So they have to try to now make the connection to Rome. So that's why they're starting in the city of Rome. It wasn't them that was in the city of Rome. It wasn't them that was taken captive to the city of Rome. It was the people of Yasharal, not the Jews. Okay, but that's where they're going to start. They're going to start in Rome. We have already told how, in response to a plea by Judah the Maccabee about the year 160 BCE for aid against the Syrians, the Roman Senate then declared the Jewish people friends and allies, though it did not send any help. During the following century, a number of Jews came to settle in Rome. Some came for reasons of trade, probably from Egypt and other diaspora lands. In the year 63 BCE, Pompey, the Roman general, conquered Palestine and carried off to Rome a large number of Jewish war captives whom he sold as slaves. Wasn't Jews, was people of Yasharal. Later, these people or their children were freed and remained in Rome. Similarly, every subsequent, by the way, in this book I'm looking, they're showing a picture of a coin from the Roman time, and it had the lampstand on the coin, and it have lions and what might look like the Ark of Contract or something, lions on the side of that. Okay. Yeah, the Ark and the lampstand. So this is an old coin that they have on here. By the way, when we dig into some more of the history of the Hasmoneans and so on, I'm going to show you, I'll use the internet for some of this so I can show it on the screen, how they change images as a part of defrauding and lying to people. Okay, how they create images. All right, now, later these people or their children were freed and remained in Rome. That's what happened to Yasharal, not the Jews. Similarly, every subsequent Jewish rebellion against Rome resulted through captives of war who were enslaved and then freed in an increase of Rome's Jewish population. It is estimated that by the time of the Great Jewish War against Rome in 66 to 71 of the Common Era, there were about 50,000 Jews in the city, not Jews, people of Yasharal. They had several synagogues and a community organization. Though there were prosperous merchants among them, the vast majority were very poor. For the most part, they were artisans and peddlers. This Jewish population soon began to take part in the political and cultural life of the city. We read that of the people of Yasharal in the book of Maccabeus, in the writings of Yahusha, who they call Josephus, and other writings, people of Yasharal. This Jewish population, as they say, soon began to take part in the political and cultural life of the city. For example, no part of Rome's population expressed greater sorrow than the Jews over the death of the popular Julius Caesar. When Nero was emperor, the most noted actor in Rome was a Jew. Another Jew, Caecilius by name, was one of Italy's foremost literary critics from Rome north. The Roman armies pitched their camps in the interior of Gaul, France, and Western Germany, and along its frontier. Around these camps, there developed the first cities of that part of the world. Close behind the armies came Jewish peddlers trying to escape from the limited economic opportunities of overcrowded Rome and bringing with them the merchandise found in the Italian cities. This is what Yasharal did, not what the Jews did. Remember now, the Jews are from Germany. You see what they say here? Germany, France, and Western Germany. The Jews were already there. The people of Yasharal came into this place. Those who hated their customs and cultures, when they had the opportunity to go back to Yasharal, they stayed in Rome. And then as Rome advanced further into Europe, our people who were in love with the heathen and their ways followed them into these places, and they settled in these places. And in these places was a set of people called the Khazars. And before long, the Khazars made friends with them because it was in their interest politically to do so, because the people of Yasharal were getting along with everybody. And so they made an alliance with them. And that's how they got entangled. So they're repeating the history of the people of Yasharal, but taking it for themselves. So close behind the armies came Jewish peddlers people of Yasharal, trying to escape from the limited economic opportunities of overcrowded Rome and bringing with them the merchandise found in the Italian cities. Thus, the Jews helped lay the foundations for the commerce of the new towns. For eventually, the peddlers established themselves permanently in these places. This is how Paris and Lyons in the interior of Gaul and Treves and Cologne and Mayence along the Rhine River acquired the first Jewish settlements. This may have happened as early as the first, but certainly not later than the 3rd century of the Common Era. These are people of Yasharal, the history of people of Yasharal, not Jewish history. Stolen history from Rome south. Jewish settlements in southern Italy and on the island of Sicily came into being even earlier than those in Gaul. The manner of these settlements was not much different from that of the Jewish community of Rome itself. That is, through Jewish slaves who, when freed, remained there. In addition, southern Italy and Sicily were on the sea route both to Rome and to Spain from the more eastern parts of the empire and from northern Africa. Consequently, merchants and their agents were tempted to settle there, Spain. The settlement of the Jews on the Iberian Peninsula, this is interesting also, Iberian or Iberia, okay? That's the word that they use in English, Iberia. Now, they claim that these people who settled in Iberia, what's called Iberia today, that these were the Jewish people. But you can look up Iberia and research who are the original people of Iberia. And what you will learn is that they're actually people of Yasharal. They were melanated people. They were black people. They say Iberia. I have a feeling it should be Abar or Abari. Okay, they say Iberia. Remember now, they changed the Aleph to an I. Okay, they changed the Ayan to an E. And they, like in English, they say change the Y to I and add ES. They do whatever they want to do. But Iberia, I haven't found the written evidence yet. I haven't found the written evidence. I've seen the evidence of the people, that the people were a melanated people, and those people were people of Yasharal. But they say that these were Jewish people. Well, the original people of the place were a dark-skinned people, were a black people. Okay, so Iberia should be Abari, okay, or Abar. They say Iberia. It keeps in line with what they do, you see. If you look up Abar in the Bible, let me give you just a quick idea. Let me go to the book of Bereshit, Genesis chapter 10, very quickly. And we're going to look for the word Abar in Bereshit chapter 10. Let me just put that on the screen. Let me look that up very quickly. Okay. Let me look that up very quickly. Whoops. What was that? I've got to let me just go here very quickly. Go to Bereshit chapter 10 and you try to find the word Abar. You will not find it in translation. Even though it's in there, it's in the text, it's in the scriptures, but you will not find it in translation. And I'll show you why. And this has everything to do with the name of the place, Iberia. Okay? We're looking up the word Abar, trying to find Abar, the name Abar, which you should find in Bereshit chapter 10. I'm trying to remember what verse it would be in, maybe verse 21 or so. Bear with me while I find it. And their language and lands and nations. Okay. If you're looking for the word abar, you won't find abar, even though it should be abar. Okay. You will find Eber, E-B-E-R, and I've even seen it in some places where they spell it I-B-E-R. Okay. Why is that? Because the way they changed the language, how should I say? It's the Yidization of the language. Okay. So this should be abar. So if we look this up, what they have as Eber, let me just show you here. I'm talking about, I'm showing you how this connects to Iberia. Okay, let's go to verse 21. Let's go to verse 21. Look at this very quickly. So the word that they have as Eber, what you see is that it's not Eber. After all, there is no E in the Abari language. Okay, it is abar. As a matter of fact, they tell you right here what it is. It is abar, A-B-A-R, abar, not Eber. Okay, all right, let's go back. Mm-hmm. You said, what did the book say, babe? It says Iberia, that the Jews, they established Iberia.
And Iberia is spoken when I looked it up, and it's
yeah, Iberia is in European territory, but
Iberian Peninsula.
yeah, but the people who settled there originally were black people. Okay, and the reason why that is because the people of Yasharal, instead of going back east, going home, they hated their customs and their culture so much. Where you read in the book of Maccabeus, it says that they stopped circumcising themselves, they stopped following the customs and the commands of Yahuah, and they began to follow the ways of the pagans, the Romans and other people. And so instead of going back home, even when freedom came, they went north and they settled in this place named after them, Abar or Abari, which is now known as Iberia, which is what you see them talk about Iberia. But when you do the research, you find that the people who settled in that place, it was a place in Europe, Iberian Peninsula. It was a dark people who settled there, you see. All right. So so the Jews are taking that history and making it theirs again, saying that was us. No, that wasn't them. That's them stealing our history, putting their name on it. Okay. Now, so Spain, it says the settlement of the Jews on the Iberian Peninsula, the land now occupied by Spain and Portugal, was likewise of ancient date. Jews used to maintain that their ancestors had come to Spain as early as the days of King Solomon. Now, this is interesting, and you need to keep this in mind. This is the Spain connection. In Israel today, you have what they call that kind of government, where you have a president and you have a prime minister, whatever they call that kind of government in Israel. But that's the form of government that they have in Israel today. You have a president and you have a prime minister, right? Now, what's the name of the president of Israel? Anybody? Is the last name of the president? Hmm? Okay. The last name of the president of Israel. Anybody know? Oh, that's the prime minister. Netanyahu is the prime minister. But the president, Perez.
Oh, okay, yeah, we just talked about.
Yeah, Perez. Okay. Perez. How many kind of Jews? Yep. They say Shimon, which should be Shamaun is what they're trying to say. But they're not the people, so they can't talk right. Right? Okay. Okay. How many types of Jews is in control of Israel? How are they defined? How are they classified? How many types of Jews are in control of Israel? Well, not from the perspective of Zionists. Yeah, they use that terminology, but from the perspective of you have
in the
I know you know it, Aki. Sephardic, right?
right.
That's right. Ashkenazi and Sephardic. The Sephardic is the Spanish side. Okay, the Sephardic is the Spanish side. I like that spelling. The Sephardic is the Spanish side. Okay. And then the Ashkenazi is the other side. Okay. So basically, what they did was, these are the same people. It's just that one is Spanish speaking and the other one spoke Yiddish. Okay. But they decided to come together, and we're going to read that as we continue in this book, how they actually joined together. Okay. How they actually joined together. Okay. We're going to see that. But that's how it came to be. So basically then, if you're going by Jewish history, the nation of Yasharal was made up of Spanish. One side of it was made up of Spanish-speaking people, and the other side of it was made up of Yiddish-speaking people, if you're going by Jewish history. Okay? That's basically what we learn if we go by Jewish history. That one side of Yasharal spoke Spanish, and the other side of Yasharal spoke Yiddish. But that's not what the scriptures tell us. You see? The scriptures tells us that all of Yasharal spoke one language. Is that not right? Scriptures tells us that all of Yasharal spoke one language, and that language was Abari. One side of Yasharal didn't speak Spanish, and the other side speak Yiddish. All of Yasharal spoke one language. Okay, so it's little details like this that help us to see the contradictions to the facts. Okay, and we have to pay attention to them. All right, so it says the settlement of the Jews on the Iberian Peninsula, the land now occupied by Spain and Portugal, was likewise of ancient date. Jews used to maintain that their ancestors had come to Spain as early as the days of King Solomon. Though this is an assertion, by the way, going back to King Solomon, the people of Yasharal traveled the entire earth. The scriptures tells us that. There was not a place on earth where they didn't go. So when Columbus came along, and they say that Columbus was the first one to sail around the earth in a boat, in a ship, that was false. Because the scriptures tells us that Solomon built ships and sent merchants around the world doing trade. People of Yasharal did that. The scriptures tells us that in the book of Kings and in the book of Chronicles. The scriptures tells us that, and not only in the book of Kings and Chronicles, but also in the book of Esdras, the scriptures tells us that. So this idea that Columbus was the first person to sail around the globe is a false idea. And who was Columbus supposed to be? Columbus is a Sephardic Jew. Okay? Columbus is a Sephardic Jew. Okay? All right, let's continue. Now, the settlement of the Jews on the Iberian Peninsula, the land now occupied by Spain and Portugal, was likewise of ancient date. Jews used to maintain that their ancestors had come to Spain as early as the days of King Solomon. Though this is an assertion impossible to prove, it is not altogether incredible. In the biblical era, that land had been colonized by the two important Phoenician cities, Tyre and Sidon, whose commercial expeditions used to go clear across the Mediterranean. King Solomon, as well as later Israelite kings, had entered into partnership with the kings of Tyre and on several occasions sent Israelites to serve with their neighbors, the Phoenicians. Later on, Spain was ruled by Carthage. Carthage was ruled by who? Carthage was settled by people of Yasharal. That's where Hannibal settled. Hannibal ruled Carthage. So Carthage was a city of Yasharal. Okay. Later on, Spain was ruled by Carthage, which had originally been a Phoenician colony and trading post. Thus, the beginnings of Spain were, if not Jewish, at least Semitic. At least Semitic. In any event, soon after Spain was taken by Rome, Jews must have begun to find their way there, attracted by the beauty and the fertility of the country. Foundation of tragedy. Rome's tolerance. Paganism was usually a tolerant religion, believing in the existence of more than one, as they say, God here. The pagan readily granted their neighbor the right to worship a god or gods other than his own. A slight degree of intolerance developed when the chief god of a country was identified with that country's honor and interest. The religion of a country then began to mean something like its patriotism, and all the inhabitants were asked on certain occasions to pay divine honor to the patron deity. No matter what other gods they might worship. The arrangements entered into between Rome and the Jews regarding the emperor's statutes have already been explained. After Caligula, there was no further interference with the religion of the Jews. And that's not Jewish history, that's history of Yasharal. Attractiveness of Judaism. Some difficulties arose because the Jews criticized paganism. Judaism, as we have seen, proved attractive to thoughtful pagans, many of whom Judaism, the way of Yasharal, proved attractive to the Jews. That's really what should be said here. The ways of Yasharal proved attractive to the Jews. That's really what should be stated. So they're telling the truth, but it's twisted. You got to read between the lines. You got to decipher. Okay. Now, so some difficulties arose because the Jews criticized paganism. Judaism, as we have seen, proved attractive to thoughtful pagans, many of whom all over the Roman emperor, including Rome itself, visited the synagogues and followed certain Jewish observances, especially the Sabbath. There was a good deal of intermarriage between Jews and pagans. That when a pagan woman married a Jew, she almost always adopted his religion. But even when a Jewish woman married a pagan man, the result was of advantage to Judaism, since the wife often brought her children up as Jews. This was particularly the case in the Roman provinces like Spain and Gaul. Much of the increase in Jewish population in these provinces is accounted for in this way. Not even the destruction of the Jewish state, with the loss of prestige, which this brought upon the Jewish people, resulted in more than a temporary setback to the spread of Judaism, Christian progress. In the meantime, another danger arose for paganism and turned the attention of the Roman government away from Judaism. Christianity made more rapid progress among the pagan population of the Roman emperor than Judaism. The first Christians were Jews, or sympathizers, not so, with Judaism. And Judaism too began to look upon Christianity as a competitor for converts among the pagans. Christianity had two advantages over Judaism. It made fewer demands and it held out greater rewards. Judaism imposed any number of restrictions, prohibitions, and commandments, not the least of them the painful operation of circumcision. Christianity asked for no more than faith in God and Jesus. Christianity also emphasized far more than did Judaism the blissful eternal life that was to follow death. The pagan who, at no sacrifice, adopted the new religion could feel that he was part of the great tradition of monotheism. At the same time, Christianity, like Judaism, offered an escape from hopelessness, for the Roman emperor was degenerating. All but a very small class of aristocrats were finding life increasingly hard, and the pagan gods offered nothing either in this world or the next. Among the poorer populations, the artisans, the slaves, Christianity spread from day to day. Judaism and the Christian triumph. In the rivalry between Judaism and Christianity for the pagans of the Roman emperor, Christianity won. The Jews had sown the seeds, and Christianity reaped a plentiful harvest. Pagans impressed by Jewish ideas were ready to abandon their old religion long before the Christian missionaries arrived. Among the missionaries of the first 2 centuries, a great many were Jews who had accepted Christianity, and even more were pagans who had been considered candidates for Judaism. Constantine's edict. Constantine's edict. By the year 311, Christianity had become so widespread that Constantine I, then Emperor of Rome, and engaged in a war with a rival, Maxentius, saw political advantage in proclaiming his favor of Christianity. He announced that Christianity was a permitted religion, just as Judaism was permitted. This was a severe blow to paganism, which had till then been the favored religion of the emperor. Later in his reign, Constantine took the next step and made Christianity the favored religion, while paganism was merely permitted. Christianity is still paganism. Okay? Church and synagogue. An important change now took place in the attitude of Christians toward the Jews. Until now, the rivalry for converts had been between the ideas of Christianity and Judaism, and in this conflict, Christianity had won. Now, however, the Christian church, that is, the organization of the Christians, took up the fight and carried it on with the assistance of the government. It had been charged that when pagan Rome persecuted the Christians, the Jews were a party to the persecution. For this charge, no real proof had been advanced. The Jews were nowhere in sight at this time, let me say. This was the 2nd and 3rd century. The Jews were nowhere around. So what they're basically repeating is basically what took place with the people of Yasharal and the Romans. But the Jews were nowhere around. But what they keep doing is they keep putting the Jews in here. But the Jews were nowhere around at this time. The Khazarian emperor had not yet been formed at this time. The Khazarian emperor came into being in the late 500s and really came to a place of recognition around 700 was when they really got to their height. And by then they were in trouble, both from the Christians and from the Arabs. And that's where they decided to make an allegiance with people of Yasharal. So all this history that they're talking about has nothing to do with them. It's just stolen history. For this charge, no real proof had been advanced. It is true that the Jews had driven the Christians out of their synagogues after the Christians had refused to support Bar Kokhba, so that it looked as though they sympathized with the Romans in that struggle. Now, again, Christianity, the people of Yasharal have been drawn to Christianity for a long time. When you read from the book of Maccabees, that's what they did. They worshiped Zeus. That's Christianity. Worship of Zeus is Christianity. And that started long before, that started back in Egypt. And then when the Greeks sprung up, and followed by the Romans, the people of Yasharal wanted to be like the Greeks and the Romans, okay? Now, where are we at now? So that it looked... It may also be true that the Jews, which would not have minded seeing Christianity disappear, but there is no proof that the Jewish people or any individual Jews instigated persecutions by the Roman emperors. In any event, churchmen of a later day justified their persecution of the Jews by the charge that the Jews of former days had helped to persecute the Christians. The policy of separation. The fact is that Judaism still appealed to a great many people among the pagans as well as among Christians. There were many Christians who respected the synagogue and its traditions as institutions of the mother religion. This whole idea of synagogue, where it came from at this time, Yasharal had no synagogue at this time. They were a scattered people. And anything in their disobedience, they would erect places. They would erect buildings, places of worship. But it was not to be, because they were a scattered people. The only place where the Haykal was to be erected was in Jerusalem, and the place is appointed by Yahuah. The disobedient who sought to follow after pagan customs did their own thing. But this idea of synagogue that so many people have bought into is not something that accepted or instructed by Yahuah.
What was that last thing you just read?
The policy of separation.
The very last thing.
Oh, the very last thing I read. Let me see. Let me go back. It says there were many Christians who respected the synagogue and its traditions as institutions of the mother religion. The Jews were more learned than many of the Christian clergy in just those books which Christianity considered sacred. Moreover, since Christianity was a movement among the lower classes of the emperor's society, you hear that now. This is important, and this is a fact. I'm going to read it again. Remember when we were doing research on the new writings, and we talked about even at the Council of Nicaea, how many of the bishops and the Christian leaders, they couldn't read. They were unlearned men. They were ignorant men. You see, historically, the people of Yasharal, and what's interesting, when you research history, what they do is they tell you that the Jews were the people who educated the Romans. But that's only when these people are white. But the Jews, who they call the Jews, were not Jews. People of Yasharal, the people of Yasharal educated the Romans. That's a fact. They were teachers. They did all kinds of work, you see. They certainly educated the Romans, but they don't tell it that way. They say the Jews did. It wasn't the Jews, it was people of Yasharal. But as we did that research, it tells you about the Romans, how ignorant they were, unlearned they were, you see. Even when they came together at the Council of Nicaea, their ignorance became a great stumbling block for them. Many times their conversations would break out into fightings. into them throwing fists and other stuff at each other, because they were ignorant men. They couldn't have a conversation without becoming frustrated, you see, because of their ignorance. The Jews were, okay, where we at now? The Jews were more learned than many of the Christian clergy in just those books which Christianity considered sacred. Moreover, since Christianity was a movement among the lower classes of the emperor's society, the more cultured pagans had more respect for Judaism, which had for centuries been a part of the Roman world. The Council of Churchmen, which met at Nicaea, see, here we go. The Council of Churchmen, which met at Nicaea in 325, undertook to separate the Jews from the Christians. It forbade Christians to eat matzah on Passover or to celebrate this holiday at the same time as the Jews. It prohibited Christians from visiting synagogues and listening to the Jewish preachers. It also urged them not to observe the day of rest on Saturday, and instituted Sunday as the only Christian Sabbath. The bishops prevailed upon the emperor to prevent pagans from becoming converts to Judaism, and also to take away from the Jews some of the political privilege which they had long enjoyed. Again, this is not the history of the Jews. This is the history of Yasharal, attacks by the word and deed. Many of the Christian clergy, who now stood very close to the Roman government, urged the emperors to deal harshly with Judaism. Not Judaism. Judaism was developed by the Jews later. But to deal harshly with the people of Yasharal concerning their way of life. Okay? Some were for prohibiting it entirely, to make their way of life illegal, just like the British did. For example, in Jamaica, and right here in America, I see a school try to do it the other day. But in Jamaica, the British government, not just in Jamaica, but in other places where the British were in charge, the British government made a law that said that the men, those who locked their hair according to our customs from scriptural times, those who locked their hair, the British government said that it was illegal. And that's why locks became known as dreadlocks, because the people in rebellion, they would seek to make their locks seem to those who hate it so much as repulsive as they could possibly make it seem. And so they call it dreadlocks, because they knew that it annoyed the British so much, you see. And so they willfully grew it in a way that it would be, the British, it was so repulsive to them, but they deliberately did it. But they would put people in jail. They would put them in jail and even kill them when they catch them. In the Rastafarian movement, where they lock their hair. I seen the other day, there's a video on Facebook where a school, it might have been in Texas or somewhere, where they made laws about the way that blacks must wear their hair, you see. In other words, you can't wear your hair. You got to do something with your hair. It's pretty the same thing they told Gabby Douglas, about her hair and about her nose, that she need to consider reconstructive surgery on her nose because it's too flat. These are people at her gym, and she need to do something with her hair and so on. The same kind of stuff continue, right? Now, where are we at? The bishops prevailed upon the emperor to prevent pagans from becoming converts to Judaism, and also to take away from the Jews, not Jews in reality, take away from the Jews some of the political privileges which they had long enjoyed. Attacks by word and deed. Many of the Christian clergy who now stood very close to the Roman government, urged the emperors to deal harshly with Judaism, really not Judaism, but the way of Yasharal, Some were for prohibiting it entirely. But the Roman government had a great deal of respect for old Roman law, and the law had always permitted, not Judaism really, they say Judaism in the book, to be practiced. A material argument was found in the fact that the Jews were numerous and economically very important. Emperors occasionally did arise and added restrictions upon Jewish life, but none of them made the practice of Judaism illegal. Really not Judaism again. The Christian clergy, however, continued to express their desire to see Judaism disappear, to see the way of Yahusha disappear. They claimed that the Jews, not Jews, but the Yahudim, had always misunderstood the scriptures. They pointed, they say Bible here, they pointed to the loss of the Palestinian state as a sign that, they say God here, had rejected and abandoned the people of Yahusha. They say the Jewish people here. Worse still, the orators among them did not hesitate to incite the mob to riot against the synagogues of their locality. Thus, the church, as soon as it acquired power, began to use those unfair methods which have flagrantly contradicted the great ideals for which Christianity stands. Misunderstanding and hate were fostered, which poisoned the relationships between the Jews and the Christians, between people of Yahusha and the Christians, the Romans. The decay of Rome. The poverty and hopelessness of the common people, which brought victory to Christianity, resulted also in the decay of Rome's culture and the sapping of Rome's strength. The emperor and the aristocrats of Rome greedily continued to accumulate wealth and power. They did nothing to maintain independence of spirit and optimism in the masses. The population of the emperor dwindled. Cities grew smaller and disappeared. Culture all but vanished. The Jews, of course, not Jews really, but Yahudim, were affected by these social changes as much as the rest of the population. The city of Rome was itself a good example of what took place. Between the 4th and 6th centuries, the population of Rome decreased. In its wealth disappeared. Its nobility moved to Constantinople. Invasions and plagues added to Rome's ruin. By the year 550, it was almost a deserted city. Its Jewish population, the Yahudi population, like the other Romans, had scattered north and south. North and south. The Yahudi population had scattered north and south. This is where now Khazar really comes in. The Yahudi population had scattered north and south. The barbarians and their religion. The growing weaknesses of the Roman emperor had made it possible for barbarian tribes to invade its territory and establish themselves as rulers in several of its provinces where Jews had settled centuries before, where Yahudim had settled centuries before. By the way, this is the Jews talking about the barbarians, but you know who the barbarians are? The barbarians are the Jews. And you look up the history of the Khazarians, of Khazar, they were considered as barbarians. They were a savage bunch. So they're talking about themselves, but not about them, but making it seem as if they're not talking about themselves. They're putting themselves off on somebody else. Okay? So now they're talking about themselves, but they don't want you to know they're talking about themselves. You see, they're claiming somebody else's history as their own and telling on themselves as if it's not them. Okay? Now, yeah, okay, I'm gonna round it up at 9:30. Okay. The growing weakness, where am I at again now? The barbarian and their religion. The growing weaknesses of the Roman emperor had made it impossible for barbarian tribes to invade its territory and establish themselves as rulers, had made it possible, for barbarian tribes to invade their territories and establish themselves as rulers in several of its provinces where Jews, Yahudim, had settled centuries before. By the year 500, Vandals ruled over North Africa, Visigoths over Spain, Franks over France, and Ostrogoths over Italy. They laid the foundations of the modern West European states. With the exception of the Franks, these tribes had become converted to a type of Christianity called Arian, containing pagan elements. Okay? Same kind of stuff, Arianism, that continues today among some. Being different from the Roman Christians, they broke the relationship between the church and the government. They permitted each religious group complete freedom of worship and took particular pains to protect the Jews against the attacks by the mob. Since they themselves preferred to live under their own tribal laws, they saw no reason for interfering with the Jews who desired to regulate their life by Jewish law, they say here. Talking about people of Yasharal. As economic change. During the period of Roman imperial greatness and decline, the Jews, people of Yasharal, underwent an economic change of considerable importance to themselves and the world in which they lived. Many of them may have started out as small farmers in various parts of the empire. Others, perhaps, after being freed from slavery or as poor immigrants, became artisans, peddlers, and merchants. Through those Jews who had made their homes on the boundaries of the emperor, the barbarians learned their first lessons in the comforts of civilization and were stirred to imitate civilized life. What they're saying is, remember now, okay, let me put this in perspective. Remember now that what they're arguing here is that the Jews are from the east, right? They're from Yasharal. And what they're saying here, listen to this carefully now. What they're saying now is that when the Jews went into Europe, they were the ones that taught the people in the Caucasus Mountains civilization. You hear that? They said that it was the Jews, which really wasn't the Jews, but the people from the east, it was the people from the east who taught the people in European territory. It was them who taught them something about civilization. He said that these people in European territories were savages. They were barbarians, they called them. What's interesting about that is that as the narrative later goes, and still continues to be today, that what was historically the Dark Continent over a short period of time came to paint a picture of it being the continent of light, and the continent of light became the Dark Continent. So you see, Africa is known as the Dark Continent, but yet it was the people from Africa who went into Europe and made them civilized. That's what this book says. And guess what? It's not just this book that says it. There are many historical writings that say it. The only thing with this book is the book is giving credit to the Jews, which the Jews themselves were people of Europe, you see. So they're not giving credit to the people, the actual people of Yasharal. They're giving credit to the Jews. But it's interesting that when they tell the story, as long as it's the Jews that they put in the place, they have no problem with saying and with admitting that it's people from the East who went into Europe and made Europe a civilized place. That's what's interesting. You see, that's what's interesting. You have a question?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm reading another book
Mm-hmm.
where the story is similar.
Mm-hmm.
And in the book that I'm reading, basically, it's giving me the emperors of that time,
Mm-hmm.
the emperors that went like on Pilate and them, how he went into Jerusalem and how, you know, he did different things there to suppress the people and stuff. So it sounded familiar, but in the book that I'm reading, it was saying he's saying that those people who went into Europe were the Moors, though.
And because people don't understand Moors in the history, what happened, the European people called all black people Moors. Today, Moors have become something of a religion. When you say Moor, people think it's religion, but that's not the way it was. Like today, they call people black, and you use the N word, and they use other words. Back then, they referred to melanated people as Moors. So it had nothing to do with religion. You see what I'm saying? It had nothing to do even with the land that you came from. You see, it just had to do with your complexion, basically. So the Europeans would refer to black people as Moors. So you see people of Yasharal in historical writings being referred to as Moors. For example, in the Library of London, I had this picture. I had it saved, but I lost it because of computer issues. I could find it again, I'm sure. But in the Library of London, they have a figure that they found in Spain of a man of Yasharal. He had locks, and it's a figure that was carved out of wood, but he had locks, and he had his tassel, he had his zit, not Jewish zit. He had his fringes going around the bottom of his shirt, you see. And they have this figure in the Library of London, or whatever the library is called. But they identify him as Moor. But when you look at it, you see that he was a man of Yasharal. You see, whoever made the thing was making an image of a man of Yasharal. You see, but in Europe earlier on, and in Spain and so on, because the people from Africa was in that place a lot, even people of Yasharal doing trade in those places, they would refer to them as Moors.
Now, because he's saying right here would seem like the Moors, and they refer to them as Judean. The Judean people and the Moors, basically, they were black. They were black like the Moors.
Yeah, but
it
yes,
sound like it's two different.
Yeah, right.
People.
So in this book, they make a distinction between people of Yasharal and the Moors, but I've seen evidence where even people of Yasharal were referred to as Moors, because Moors wasn't a matter of today. Just like in this book, this guy referred to people of Yasharal as Jews. Okay, which is wrong. In the same way, he make a separation between Moors and people of Yasharal, when from a European perspective, the Europeans refer to all black people as Moors.
Oh, they just summed it up.
Yes.
Okay.
At least at one point in their history, that's just the way it was.
Okay, because here it says that the Moors from Africa ruled Spain and Portugal for about 700 years, and the Jews were in these countries even longer. Okay, so.
And this is saying basically what this book is saying. You see what I'm saying? Now when this book talk about the Jews, it's actually talking about black people, but he's calling black people Jews, which he shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So, okay, now Okay, now, so let's, by the way, what book was that again there, babe? But let me just, the book we were talking about just now. The book that my wife was just making reference to is called The Valley of the Dry Bones. By who? By Rudolph L. Windsor. In that book, he says that the Jews are a black people. So he's referring to black people as Jews, which is incorrect. But he's telling the same history, but he's giving you evidence of the so-called Jews being black. But the Jews is not a title of the people of Yasharal. Okay. Now, okay. I'm going to read for another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to open up to questions and comments, family. And as we continue in this book, it's going to get more interesting as we go, but I can't wait to get to the point where we get to the whole banking system. We're going to look at that book, The Synagogue of Satan, to understand some more. But it's going to take us up to modern day as we continue to read. Now, so here now it says a cultural change. The changes within the Roman emperor resulted also in a cultural change among the Jews. And again, not the Jews, people of Yasharal. As the Jews left the cities, they could not maintain their connections with the schools and other communal institutions which they had developed. The unsettled conditions of the time also prevented them from keeping in constant touch with one another and with the centers of learning in the East. The culture of the Romans and of the inhabitants of the emperor, you hear that now, pay attention to that, the centers of learning in the East. Now, there was a video, I played a little bit of it on YouTube in the room a few weeks back. That's this Christian group out there that's going around trying to call on people to refute anybody who is claiming to be Yasharal that are not Jews. That's that Christian group going around doing that. It's a radio program. Now, he pointed out that the book Babylon to Timbuktu, that it's a false book and that it should be refuted in that video. The people in the video, these Christian people. And in reality, what he don't realize in his ignorance, you see, this book right here is talking about the places of learning in the East. And the book, Babylon to Timbuktu, that's the history that it's laying out. Talking about the places of learning in the East. Okay, talking about civilization and the development of civilization. That civilization developed in the East. It makes sense because that's where creation started. Creation started in the East. So why wouldn't civilization develop in the East? When the Romans studied medicine, they didn't come up with these things on their own. Where did they go and find what they learned? From people who existed before them in the East. Okay, so even right here in this book that I'm reading, according to this Jewish writer, Solomon Grazel, the center of civilization was in the East. But it's interesting. When they attempt to put the Jews in the East, which they don't come from, which they don't belong, which is not where they, as a nation of people, that's not where they developed. But when they attempt to put them in the East, then everything began in the East. Everything starts in the East. But when it's no longer about them being in the East, then the East is the dark continent. You see the hypocrisy. You see. So what they're saying here now is that the Jews being scattered, they got disconnected from the centers of learning in the East. The culture of the Romans and of the inhabitants of the emperor having reached the vanishing point, the culture of the Jews also lost in extent and intensity. Among the Jews, however, it did not quite disappear. The need to read prayers and to know, as they say, the Bible, which would be the scriptures, and not Jews, but Yahudim, demanded a minimum of knowledge among them, and this little as it was far exceeded the knowledge among the Christians. Now, let me point out something else. You see, these people of Yasharal, that they're talking about here, they're using Jews, but they're talking about people of Yasharal. These people of Yasharal, they were not the preservers of Torah. They were the corrupters of Torah. These people of Yasharal who went north instead of going back east. These people of Yasharal who denied the ways of Yahuah, they're the deniers of the ways of Yahuah. They're the people who wanted to be more like the Romans, okay, and others. So they weren't the preservers of Torah. They were the corrupters of Torah. These are the people responsible for the beginning of the Talmud. And then when they joined themselves with the Jews then took it upon themselves to expand the Talmud. So what the Jews were learning from these people of Yasharal, were pagan ways, the ways of Yahuah mixed with pagan practices. And that's the creation of Judaism. You see, yes, they're the ones that say, let's make contracts with the heathen. That's exactly them. So these weren't the guarders of Torah. These were the people who went out of the way to make contract with the heathen. That's who these people are. Okay. Now it goes on to say the need to read prayers and to know, they say the Bible here, the scriptures, demanded a minimum of knowledge among them. And this little, as it was, far exceeded the knowledge among the Christians. You hear that? So, again, I got to point this out. Because when they're writing and saying that this is talking about the Jews, they have no problem with saying that the Christians were ignorant people, that they couldn't read, that they couldn't write, when they're talking about the Jews. But the reality is they're not telling the history of the Jews. They're telling the history of a people from the East, a melanated people. So what they're saying is that these people could read and write, but the Christians couldn't read or write. So that whole narrative about the slaves not being able to read and write, again, we see from their own mouth, from their own pens, we see it to be false. Because again, this is not the history of the Jews. This is the history of people of Yasharal. And what they're saying in this history is that the Christians, the Romans, the majority of them were ignorant people, couldn't read, couldn't write. But yet, people are taught in school today. When you go to college and you begin to study psychology and things like that, you know what they tell you? They tell you that the Romans were the most brilliant people that has ever walked the earth. That the Romans teach us everything. The Romans teach us to build roads. The Romans teach us to build buildings. The Romans teach us medicine. The Romans teach us this. The Romans teach us that. The Romans teach us everything. That's what they tell you in school. That's what they tell you in college. Yet it's not true. All right. Now, so the need to read prayers and to know the scriptures, they say the Bible here, demanded a minimum of knowledge among them, among the Yahudim. And this little, as it was, far exceeded the knowledge among the Christians, whether laymen or clergy, Roman or barbarian. The Christians consequently had a great deal of respect for the Yahudim, not the Jews, the Yahudim. Now, this is interesting. Pay attention to that. The Christians had a great deal of respect for the Yahudim. Keep that in mind, because when you go to the book, The 13th Tribe by Arthur Koestler, that Jewish man, he's going to say the same thing, that the Christians had a great deal of respect for the real people of Yasharal. He's going to say the same thing you just heard me read right here. In the book, The 13th Tribe, Arthur Koestler, a Jewish man, said the same thing. That the Christians had a great deal of respect for the people of Yasharal, and for that reason, they did not attack them. It came a point where they weren't attacking them. And the same thing with the Arabs. They weren't attacking them. And that's where Khazar comes in. That's where Khazar say, oh, you know what? They get along with them really well and they trade with them. They get along with the Christians and they do trade with them and they're at peace. And they get along with the Arabs and they do trade with them and they're at peace. But the Christians and the Arabs want to attack us, the Jews, the Yids. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to join ourselves with the people of Yasharal, and by joining ourselves with them, the Christians will be more hesitant since they're friends with them, and the Arabs don't disturb them. Then they won't bother us because they already have an established trade partnership with them, and they're not going to want to disrupt that. So that's where Khazar comes and ties in with Yasharal. That's what Arthur Koestler tells us. That's what other writers tells us, and that's what this book is getting at, except that it's twisting it, you see. Okay, so he says, the Christians consequently had a great deal of respect for they say Jews here, but it's not Jews, it's the Yahudim. The Christian farmer often called a Jew, not a Jew, but a Yahudim, and not a priest, to Barak. So the Christian farmer, he wouldn't call the Christian priest to Barak his field. He would call a person of Yasharal to Barak his field. Even though he was a Christian, he wasn't going to go call his priest. He would often call a person of Yasharal to Barak his field. So the Christian farmer often called, they say a Jew, but it's not a Jew, person of Yasharal, and not a priest, to Barak his soil or his crops, as was the custom of those days. No wonder the Christian clergy were upset by this situation, and in their meetings or councils passed resolutions prohibiting Christians from calling, they say Jews here, in, and they say here to bless the soil, or to intermarry with Jews, or to have Jews settle disputes among them. But these things went on nevertheless. By the way, now they're talking about Christians intermarrying with Jews, but it's not really Jews. Remember, they just put the word Jew in here. What this is talking about is Yahudim. That brings us to the history of Italy. Italy. Remember we talk about Iberia, the Iberian Peninsula, and the countries in that area, Italy. Okay? It's a historical fact. And I've even seen it in a movie. They show you that the reason why Italians have the tint that they have and the black hair that they have is because they mixed with who? They mixed with black people. Now, who were the black people who settled in this region? This is another part of that fact. I said it earlier, that what they call Iberia, which should be Abar or Abari, based on the people who settled there, people of Yasharal. What other historical sources tell us, and I was watching a movie that pointed this out, and it had a lot of cursing in it. It was a mafia movie. But among Italians, Italians who have rich black hair, what they say is that the reason why their hair is the way it is because they mixed with black people. They have melanin in them that comes from mixing with black people. Who were the blacks that they mixed with? The people who settled in that peninsula. And the people who settled in that peninsula were people of Yasharal. They were the people that brought civilization to that peninsula. Okay? And that's how they get their complexion and their hair color. Okay? So the people of Yasharal, in their disobedience, was doing a whole lot of stuff they were commanded not to do. Mixing with a whole lot of nations and peoples that they were commanded not to mix with. They wanted to make an alliance with these people who they were commanded not to make an alliance with because of their way of life. But that's exactly what they did, and it became their ultimate downfall, because the very people they mixed with became their oppressors. Okay? I forget the name of that movie, but if I could remember it, and they have a clip, the clip on YouTube. It's a mob movie where the guy was getting ready to kill the guy. He was an Italian. The guy he's getting ready to kill, and he was telling him who he is and why he was going to kill him, because he got black blood in him, you see. and it was saying this is how you got your hair and stuff. Oh, well, the guy that was getting ready to get killed was saying to the Italian guy, this is why your hair is black and so on, because you used the N word, you got N blood in you. And he gave him a little bit of history, and so the guy got upset and shot him, you know, even more forcefully, I guess, out of rage when he said that. But it's a known fact, and all of that history ties together here. Okay, but these things went on nevertheless. Okay, I'm going to stop right here, family. The next time we come back to this book, I'm going to pick up in the same chapter, Church, Politics, and Persecution. Church, Politics, and Persecution. Okay, church, politics, and persecution. So that's where we're going to pick up when we come back to the book. But I want to open up the mic to any comments or questions, if there are any, and then we're going to prepare to close. I have to get my son from work shortly. All right. Let me just, okay, go ahead, Akud Araki Rob. Akud Shar Araki Rob. Please go ahead.
You heard?
Yes, indeed, Aki. Shalom to you. Great to hear you.
Shalom. Always my pleasure, Aki. And I hope this message reaches our Mishpachah in the best of health. You know, Aki, my father was full-blooded Italian.
Oh.
And we always knew that we had mixed blood in us.
Yes.
I have often told my wife about my Uncle Chuck that had a better fro than a Hebrew. Okay? I mean that goes without question.
Yes.
But one other thought I had, because we've always spoken within our Italian community, we've always thought that it was when Hannibal crossed the Alps from Carthage that's when the mixture began between blacks and the Italians.
It did start there also.
I want to throw that out to you.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I just wanted to say, because I know you're going to go pick up your son, is I didn't, you know, I told my wife that it's always so informative when I listen to you, because, you know, I learn a lot about history too. I had no inclination that the Egyptians were the first Christians and that the Romans stole that from them.
Yes.
So, but Aki, do you think that there was also that influx from Carthage, from Hannibal, when he crossed the Alps with his elephants, and they integrated with the Romans?
Oh yes, you're absolutely correct there also, Aki. So it started even before this period, because again, like you said, with Carthage, it started back then with Hannibal, because there was that integration that took place there also, and then it later on again it continued when they settled there in Iberia. So yes, that's absolutely correct, Aki. I forgot to mention that sooner.
So who was first, Hannibal
Yes.
or Alexander? Because remember, we talked about the two Hebrew sons.
Alexander came later.
Alexander Janus.
Hey, let me see. Alexander.
Remember,
Alexander was before. Alexander was before, I think, if I recall correctly.
A lot of times when they mixed, especially if it was people of importance, it was to make an alliance there.
Yes.
Too. So.
Absolutely. And the history of Yasharal mixing with other nations goes back quite a ways. It goes all the way back to the very beginning. Remember now that earlier on they would even mix with Egyptians, right, and other people for political purposes. But Aki Rob is absolutely right that even during Hannibal's rule of Carthage, that also the mixing also took place there also. So it's something that has continued, you know. But so that is absolutely so, Aki. Praise Father, and Tada for bringing that up and for reminding me of that. All right. Any other comments or questions, family? Let me just check YouTube.
Shalom, family.
Shalom to you, Aki.
Yeah, this is Aki Franklin.
Oh,
I'm on the phone line today.
okay, Aki.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the Moorish or the etymology of the Moorish.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a website it's called tanetter.org.
Uh-huh.
It gives a description of where the word Moorish came from. It wasn't solely about like a religion or anything like that. It applied to any black people at the time, and even in Greek,
yes,
there's a Greek word that means, which is where they got the word Moorish from.
Yes.
The English word Moorish. There's a Greek word that means dark or black, and the Greek used to refer to any dark person as
a Moor.
As that word, which then they were translated into the Moors.
Yes. Yes. What is it? TANetter? TANetter.com? Is that it, Aki?
Yeah, TANetter.org.
TANetter.org. There might be NETER.
And the title of the article is The Moors of Europe, and they give the etymology of the word, that it's not solely attached to a religion or Islamic belief or African religion.
Yes. Yes. To that, Aki, that's absolutely correct. In my research over the years, I've come across that information. Maybe I don't know if it's from that site or through different sources. I've come across, learned that information, and that's what I was making reference to. So thank you for the source of that.
You're welcome.
To that, Rabbi. Okay. Yes, indeed. So, family, certainly enjoyed reading here, making our way through the corruption. And we're going to continue to read. Did I hear someone? Okay, no? Okay. Yeah, so we'll continue to read this book, but basically this is the history of Yasharal just hijacked. You see, the history of Yasharal hijacked is what this is. And we'll continue to examine it, and then we'll go to other sources as time goes on. So we talk about the book, The 13th Tribe. We talk about the book, The Synagogue of Satan. We talk about the book, some of the books that my wife is currently reading. The Valley of Dry Bones and books like that. And we'll compare these historical texts and others because the history of our people is very much preserved and very much alive. The only problem is that the names of the characters have been changed. And so we just got to put the names back where they belong and allow the evidence to prove it. And so that's what we'll continue to do. And so we give Yahuah praise, honor, and esteem for this opportunity. And we'll continue to dig. Oh, the name of the book, Akut Carmen, the name of the book that I'm reading is A History of the Jews. A History of the Jews by Solomon Grazel, spelled Grayzel. A History of the Jews by Solomon Grazel. This is a Jewish writer who, again, all he did was took Yasharal's history and just put Jews in its place. And I find it interesting that he titled it A History of the Jews and not The History of the Jews, because if I was going to write a book that have so much details about our people, I wouldn't title it A History of Yasharal or A History of the Yahudim. I would title it The History of the Yahudim, because it's very detailed. But I believe the reason why you say A History of the Jews is because there are many versions of histories of the Jews, you see. So I think that's why, to be safe, he say A History of the Jews. But we'll continue to go through it, and it is my hope that it will be enlightening to everyone that hears. All right. So we're going to prepare to end here, family. Once again, it's been a baraka spending this evening with you. And do look forward to seeing you. Okay, go ahead, Akut Vernice. Go ahead, Akut. Okay. Aki Rob or Akut Shar? Let's see. Okay, let me see if I find it. You bear with me just for a second. Let me scroll back up. Let's see. Uh-oh. Where's it at? Where's it at? Okay, I'm missing it. I'm trying to scroll to find it. Let me see. I'm still trying to find it. Bear with me here. I'm still looking for the question. Where's that? People of Yahusha. Oh. Yep, people of Yahusha were identified as people of Matzrayim. Looking at something like Keenan wrote there. Oh boy, I can't. I miss. Yeah, go ahead, Akut, because I can't find the question.
Okay. Well, shalom, Mashpaka. No, it was to Keith Franklin. Actually, I was wondering what did he say that website was again? Did he say TA Netta?
Yeah.
Or C as in can? CA Netta.
Okay. So Keith Franklin, that's the question. Is it TA Netta or CA Netta?
T as in Tom.
Okay.
TA Netta.
Okay, to that. T as in Tom. T as in Tom. TA Netter. To that.
To that.
Yes, Aki Franklin couldn't see because he's on his phone. And I'm sorry, I wasn't even thinking of that when the question came up. Yeah, so to the again, Aki. And family, I want to say to you, to the Aki Franklin, to the Aki Robert. Because it's so important. Sometimes I come, and I'm not the person that sits down and kind of put all the facts together, and then because I don't plan lessons, believe it or not, I don't. When I study, I don't sit down and write out studies or anything like that. I just load the wagon and then allow Yahuah to unpack it the way he sees fit. And so I don't know what I'm going to talk about necessarily when I come to the room. So I don't have anything written out. So it's helpful sometimes when I make reference to something and somebody can validate it. That's greatly appreciated because it's just not my style to sit and write out stuff and put links up. It's not my style. But it's probably something I should do, but my wife always say that to me, but I don't know. It's just not my style. I kind of just load the wagon and let Yahuah unpack it, But anyway, family, I'm running out of time, so we're going to close out. By the way, let me just take a last peek at YouTube. Once again, I want to say to you all, family, to the family on YouTube and here on Fuse, to the Rabbah for being here this evening and for making this an interesting fellowship as always. So we're gonna close out here, family. Hallelujah. Abba Yahuah, we thank and praise you for this evening, for the information that went forth. We thank and praise you for the continued awakening of your people.
May you continue to work in our lives, Yahuwah, and to reveal yourself to us and make us set apart unto you. Give us a desire to live for you and not to desire to neglect your ways and to turn away from your instructions, but rather to esteem you and to be in love with you and to be in love with your commands, your instructions, to live in them, to walk in them. Do this, we pray. Let us find no greater joy than in serving you. Do this, we pray, Yahuwah, Yahusha's name. Aman. Halahu Yahuwah. Well, family, may Yahuwah barak you and keep you. May Yahuwah cause his face to shine upon you and show favor unto you. May Yahuwah lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. May the name of Yahuwah, the preserving name, the protecting name, the providing name, the delivering name, may the name of Yahuwah be upon you. Halahu Yahuwah. Love you all. Leila Tub and Shalom. Okay. Close. Oops.